Okay, we are a few days away from a new sitting president and inauguration in the United States. We've got a pro-road government up here, so everybody's on holidays. The weather is pretty cold, but the market is starting to heat up. Say hello to Sean Humphries. I'm Vaughan Zawadzki, and we're mortgage people. Hello, Sean.
Hey, is it really that cold?
I think it's a -9 or this morning. That's cold enough for me.
Felt like -20, I think. But yeah, lots going on up here, and not happening, I guess, with the Canadian government prorogued. Saw Mark Carney on Jon Stewart Daily Show the other day. So there's things happening in politics, just maybe not government business being done.
Yeah, it's really it's hard to understand where the state of our leadership is at the moment because, current, I guess, prime minister, is still being involved. He's meeting with PMs to go over primarily the tariff threats by, incoming President Donald Trump. So it's like there's sort of a leadership, but then everybody's also not making decisions. I guess everybody's working, but not doing anything. I explain this one.
Yeah, I guess they're not meeting, right? So they're not meeting in Parliament to discuss the merits and of what the government is doing. They've just put that aside, but the government is still working. It's all hands on deck when it comes to the tariff threats and the new, even just like the new administration in the US, where, put the tariff threats aside for a second. A new administration calls on everybody in Canada to be ready for what might happen next. And I don't think that question has ever been bigger when it comes to what happens next. And, bringing it back to our world, what happens next with mortgage rates?
Mortgage rates, interest rates, what goes on with the economy, right? Because it's the economy that drives our interest rates. It's the overall economy, the GDP, the employment, drives our interest rates, which has proven that interest rates drive our business, specifically in the GTA over the last couple of years. With the high interest rates, affordability just went out the window. In other markets, not as huge of an impact, but overall on Canada, our market and the Greater Vancouver market really sort of drives the real estate industry just by sheer volume.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, interest rates will, as they come down, more people start counting their dollars a little bit differently, start thinking, well, I can afford that payment now. I can get into the market on, a payment that is lower. And they might feel like this is their window, right? As property values haven't increased as quickly and the cost of buying is coming down, affordability has gotten slightly better, but that long-term trend line doesn't slope down, it slopes up when it comes to affordability. So, if you're gonna jump in, maybe now might be the time, regardless of the unknowns.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're wanting to buy a place to live and you're not trading, property like a stock, then it's always a good time to get in, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this week we have a ton of headlines. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of economic predictions from different economists that go up, that go down, that go sideways. We're going to dive into that a little bit. And, our folks at Design came up with this really sexy intro for headlines. So we're going to roll it because we love it. God, isn't that nice?
Headlines.
I know. I feel like I should be shuffling a stack of papers here, but we're all digital over here. So this was something that I read last week about some rapid construction, unprecedented amounts. Let me read. This is based on in Quebec, based on what the Housing Accelerator Fund. So it was launched in March 2023. The Housing Accelerator Fund is a $4 billion Government of Canada initiative, to which $400 million was added in the 2024 budget. It aims to accelerate the construction of 100,000 housing units across the country. So there are 500 units expected to be built in the Quebec market next year, sort of modular homes. But look, we've had wartime building before in Canada, which a lot of it is still being bought and sold today. A lot of it is actually being upgraded now. So to me, this is great news. Like I said before, get the shovels in the ground, build now, ask questions later. What's your take on that, Sean?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is where I want to see my tax dollars go, is towards building more housing. So let's fill in under the low income, medium income. Let's make sure that there's enough housing for every Canadian, and there's a dearth of that right now. So this is where I want to see my dollars going, is towards building housing, transportation, obviously. I think that just makes everybody's quality of life better. It helps along the fringes of everything else, crime, education. People can feel like they can get more education. I think that giving people a place to live is what makes the country strong. They built. They've got some units coming up in Quebec. The federal government chipped in almost $1 billion. We'll call it the exact number, 998 million. I don't know why they just round up to a
Why not?
cool billion.
They want to give us the guys that they're being shrewd. They're not overspending. If it's under $1 billion, yeah,
998. It's on sale. And then the Quebec provincial government also kicked in another 998 million, and so they're building 8,000 units, which should be completed in 2026. And I thought, wow, like $2 billion for 8,000 units, like that doesn't seem like a lot of money. You know what I mean?
yeah.
But then I looked at it, and it's 248,000 per unit.
All right.
For each of the units. I'm like, well, that seems a little bit more realistic. You're not going to build a property for less than 250,000. Like that seems like
Sure, not in this
money
day and
going
age.
to the right place.
Yep. Yeah, I mean,
It doesn't.
I'm all for let's build. If it's government building, if it's private building, let's just build. Let's get this going, because we have, we had to cut back on immigration, in my opinion, strictly because we don't have housing. So if we need immigration to support the GDP, to support job growth, then we need houses to put people. So let's get at it.
Pay for our social services too, right? Like we need, we've got an aging population. We need to bring in more young people. We need to import young people essentially to pay our taxes and pay our hospital bills and pay to keep our infrastructure going for our aging population, as we all live a longer life. And, baby boomers, are into retirement now. They're not contributing to the GDP in the same way that they were before.
For sure.
So I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I know you had mentioned all that money is going towards consultants and that cost. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, look, if we're seeing actual building, the quicker they can turn it around from a decision of yes, let's build, to when they actually start building, that's going to help ease some of that frustration for me. It's just, if it gets tied up for 6 years and there hasn't been a shovel put in the ground, I'm going to be screaming about it. I worry that the government has enough resources. Most of us pay 50% of our income into tax. If I hear people crying about, how the evils of capitalism, I'm like, sure. But what country are you talking about? Because if you give half your money to the government, it feels an awful lot like we're living in socialism right now. So let's see results for that money that they're collecting, and less chatter and less red tape. Let's just get at it.
Let's get at it. It seems to be happening.
So Canadian bond yields are up. We outpaced the U.S. I think we went up 8 basis points, and they ticked up like 1 basis point in the latest forecast. And as a result, we saw fixed rates come up over the last 5 days between sort of 15 and 25 basis points, depending on the lender. we want lower interest rates. High bond yields means low uh, purchasing price for the bonds as well. So, um,
Hmm.
I mean, hopefully we get some balance, and we do want to see the fixed rates come down, just in terms of affordability for consumers out there.
Yeah, I mean, get your pre-approval now. I mean, there's not just this unknown with what's going to happen in the U.S. With tariffs. Our economy in December was stronger, which was a positive reading for the first time in several months. So that's putting some weight underneath or some air underneath those bond yields, and that directly correlates to the mortgage rates. So if you're in the market, if you're thinking about it, now's the time to get pre-approved, because there's nobody really knows what's going to happen next.
Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of different economic perspectives here, thinking about where the economy is going to move. So definitely, the pre-approval is a no-brainer because it's essentially just protection for the
Yeah,
future. And if rates go down, then obviously your pre-approval rate, your rate hold, that's going to move down with it. So go ahead and lock it in terms of a pre-approval.
for sure.
Okay, wanted to look at this. So we go through predictions, and what I really wanted to sort of get at is my prediction and then Sean's prediction for, like, what are we we're not there yet. We're definitely seeing more activity in the market, which is great. I think the affordability has returned somewhat, but in order to get back to that market that we're used to, the feeding frenzy will not happen, and here are my predictions, until
Hmm.
at least fixed rates drop under 4%. So right now they're about 4.5. Prime rate drops to 4.7. We're at 5.2, and overnight rate at 2.5. So
We're at
Sean,
5.45 for the prem rate. You're already baking in the
sorry,
January rate cut.
the January rate cut. Yeah, yeah. So
You're a
we
week
have.
ahead, 2 weeks
Uh,
ahead.
I know, I'm like wishful thinking, right? But
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that we'll get that rate cut of at least 25 basis points in January, despite the
yeah.
employment numbers that came out. Sean, what do you think in terms of, like, feeding frenzy? That's where we were. It was crazy. Are we going back there? What
Yeah.
environment do we need to get back there?
Yeah, I think well, I don't think we get it this year. I don't think, like, in terms of feeding frenzy, I'm thinking 100,000 plus units a year. And that's
In the
for the
GTA,
Toronto
right?
Real Estate
Yeah.
Board. Yeah, Toronto Real Estate Board last year, 2024, was around 67,000 units. So, and I think the record is somewhere around 115,000. So we're well below
Yeah.
record frenzy territory that we remember back in 2021, and then previous to that 2016 was pretty crazy as well. And so those eras, I don't think we're headed back to that this year. Just the unknowns, the interest rates will not fall far enough for that to be the case if we're just
Yeah, the
basing it
predictions are
only
more like,
interest rates.
if they hit that sort of that low level, around 2%, 2.5% for the overnight rate, it's most of the projections that will come in sort of, will get there by Q4, which would support your idea or argument that we won't get back to a feeding frenzy this year. So based on all the economic forecasts that we have sort of available to us, I would agree that we won't see it this year because we won't get to that. We won't meet that interest rate criteria.
Yeah, I think if we have interest rates fall, that we could have a recession this year. That is on the docket for many
Yeah,
people
we've sort
are
of skirted it.
worried about that.
We have economists, Benjamin Tall said, like, we were in a recession already, or we are in a recession now. Now
Well,
they're talking
per
about,
capita recession, per capita GDP, so number of people versus how much, because we added so many people.
right.
Are If we didn't add those people, then we would have had a recession essentially.
Yeah. Or yeah, the economic circumstances said that we were in a recession like last summer, according to
Right.
Ben Tall. And then now we're talking about a second recession, or further of this recession? We can't even get the economists to agree where we are financially as a country.
Well, I think, it's kind of leading into our next point as well. But depending on what happens in the US and depending on which industries are most affected here in Canada by what happens next, then we could have a recession in Canada. But I also think that it's going to be based on certain industries, right? Will we have an oil and gas recession? That's going to really hurt Alberta, for example.
For
We
sure.
would see property values probably decrease there. And that affects everybody in Canada, not just Alberta, but most acutely in Alberta. But here in Toronto, we've got a lot more financial jobs. Will the banks cut people? Will they
Sure.
take an opportunity to lay off people? Does a new administration in Canada, a new government in Canada, do they lay off some workers to try to cut costs there as well? So depending on what happens, here we go with our tariff talk, and we're less than a week away from finding out what actually might happen.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we find out, sort of right away if this is going to happen or not, so we can react. But keeping with the headline sort of theme of this week, I'll read a couple things here from the article that I read. We have Alberta Premier Danielle Smith met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and she believes, she came back and said she believes the threats of 25% across the board are real. And the impact of this, as predicted, I don't have the economist written down here, but we can put it in the notes for the show. Across the board, 25% US tariffs, along with proportional retaliatory tariffs, would reduce Canada's exports and cause its GDP to fall to 2.5% peak to trough by early 2026, predicts Oxford economists. Oh, there you go. Inflation would surge to 7.2 by mid-2025, and 150,000 layoffs would lift the unemployment rate to 7.9% by year end. I mean, that sounds abysmal. I mean, we're talking,
Yeah, seriously.
potential stagflation, where we're going to be stuck with high interest rates and high prices, and they're predicting negative 6% GDP. So the lowest GDP we've had in the last sort of 30 years, more than that, like 40 years, was during the first year of the pandemic, when production and everything halted
Ground to a halt. Yeah.
Right. And so it's rebounded since that, but then minus 6%. This is a prediction, and it's a big if, and it's a big what if, if the stable genius in the United States actually pulls the trigger on this 25% across the board tariff, which we haven't seen in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that Canada's ever seen sort of a massive sort of trade war like that with the United States. But if the worst things happen and our GDP is negative 6%, that will essentially be, other than that blip for the first year of COVID, the worst GDP that Canada's seen in our lifetimes.
I mean, it's all on the table at this point. I also heard he's now considering every month to ratchet up the tariffs by 2 to 3% every month. So we get to 25% by the end of the year, and that's to reduce the impact of inflation. Sounds like, I read this morning, sounds like economic waterboarding, essentially, like just a little bit at a time.
That's
I like
a great
that
term. Yeah.
Yeah.
We should get that tattooed on your arm. Economic waterboarding.
Yeah. And depending on how bad these things get, all bets are off in terms of housing, in terms of our GDP, in terms of unemployment, what happens with our real estate. If inflation goes up and we're in stagflation, the Bank of Canada has to, I mean, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
And
right?
there's no
So
playbook to get out of stagflation.
But it should end quickly, right? Like, how long do we go on? Do we spend all 4 years of the Trump administration with 25% tariffs? That seems very unlikely, because of the pain it would also cause the U.S.
For sure economy. That it would cause pain in the U.S. And so I don't know if Trump's economic advisors, I don't know who that is, Elon Musk or somebody, like, should know better. If they're highly qualified people, should understand the impact that it would cause to the United States and to their economy. But unfortunately, I haven't read a whole lot of articles pointing out how big of an impact that this would have on the U.S. So I think that as you start to factor in more and more factors, this thing gets confusing. We're looking at like the mathematical phenomenon, or the three body equation, or the three body problem. Sorry, and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, it gets so convoluted that I'm not gonna make any massive predictions or base my financial future on that. But it's something to look out for.
Well, the two biggest things, well, our biggest export to the US is oil. And if they're not buying our oil, they have to buy it from other less stable sources.
Sure.
Venezuela, Saudi Arabia. I don't even think they would ship it over here. But if they're not, they rely on our oil, they rely on our lumber. And so if they're trying to lower the cost of groceries and of transportation, of industry down there,
It's
making
not
the
going to
US
do it.
population spend 25% more on lumber and oil doesn't seem like the way to do it. And so everything
Specifically
gets more
with
expensive.
Russia, we're that being out of the equation for purchasing, because they sold oil and gas, relatively affordable for years, but obviously with their international conflict and their invasion of the
Yeah.
Ukraine, so nobody's
You
going to
can't
buy
tell
their
me
oil.
they're not going to buy Russian oil. Like they're going to buy Venezuelan oil, like from a communist
Right. Yeah.
country. Like that seems ridiculous to me.
It
Like,
does. It seems ridiculous. It seems far fetched. I mean, everybody's scrambling, and Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, was. I think she went down there to plead with Trump to say, "Hey, please exclude our oil from this," and he basically said, "No way."
yeah,
Meanwhile, here in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford is saying, "No, we'll go to war.
yeah,
we'll
let's
we'll
go.
have we'll have an energy war with the United States." Like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, that sounds ridiculous too. Like, and with our pro-road government, like our heads should be spinning, and they certainly are spinning, because we're not quite sure who's running the ship. And to be
Well, it
honest,
seems like it's status quo in terms of the transition. They've got people in place. I know some of the leaders, liberal cabinet members who maybe were up for liberal leadership, are not putting their hat in the ring because of everything that's happening in
it's a
their day to
dumpster
day.
fire over there at the
Yeah,
Liberal Party.
well, and yeah, for sure. But the people that are in charge of the US transition, they're not also saying, "Okay, I want to be prime minister now." Right?
Sure.
They're focused on the US transition. So hopefully we get, it went fairly well. I mean, I think it went fairly well last time that Trump was in power and he imposed tariffs and he tore up the free trade agreement. I think
Yeah,
we
and he
did
wrote a
fairly
new
well.
one.
Like we held
Yeah.
our ground, and I don't. So I'm less worried about that. I think if we were just completely going to be um uh bamboozled by him and railroaded, then I'd be worried about it. But I think that we're in a position, we have some ammo to use to fight back. I don't think we're completely weaklings in this. Obviously, much smaller economy, but they rely on us.
Sure, they do, and we rely on our tremendous history of trade partnership. They're our biggest trade partner, and they will most likely remain our biggest trade partner. And hopefully, with their new administration, and then with our eventual new administration, that there's some cohesion there, and that we get it figured out. But I'm not sure that I have a ton of faith in our new administration yet, because it seems like the leader of the Conservative Party right now is content to sit back and watch it burn, so that he can say, "Hey, it wasn't my fault. Look how bad they did."
Right.
I would like him to step up and be a little bit more vocal and be a little bit more active. If he's going to be the next leader, start working on solving this problem now publicly.
I, yeah. Well, what tools does he have to do that? I mean, as the opposition leader, can he really? He's just doing the blame game to get elected. I think if the roles were reversed, the Liberals would be saying the same thing it's about the Conservatives. Conservatives are doing the same about the Liberals. I don't have a lot of faith in Polyev to be that guy. I know people love him and he's the new guy. I just don't know. I don't know what kind of background he has to be able to solve these sort of problems as a lifelong politician.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess and I completely understand that, and there's a political game being played. I would like to see finally somebody step up and be an adult in the room and say, "Hey, we need cohesion now."
Yeah.
If I were him, or if I were wearing his shoes, I would think, not arrogantly, I would think that I have this next election won. So why keep with the same rhetoric of look how terrible this guy did. People already
Yeah.
have that opinion. People already, I would say air quotes, know that. So maybe it's time somebody's got to step up and try to pull this country together.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're trying to do it. Like, I mean, Trudeau did go down to Mar-a-Lago. Danielle Smith went down. Chrétien's talking. Harper's talking. I miss somebody. Ford went on CNN.
Ford did a little
or
media
Fox
tour.
News.
Yeah.
So it seems like we're putting, Team Canada is fighting back. We're extending the olive branch. We're talking about, let's keep this a good relationship. But I just don't think he's got anybody on his team that's going to push back on his ideas like he did in the first administration.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's all yet to be seen. And I guess what I'm wondering, is there a silver lining here? Is there a shred of hope with all this doom and gloom? And I don't like to bring the doom and gloom, but the more I read, the more doom and gloom I find out. I mean, I would say I was thinking about this literally, and I think that if you were to bury your head under sand for 3 months or something like that, there's a real strong potential that you could pull your head out and everything is fine and things have been taken care of. I don't know that you need to be reading the headlines or watching, this small section of our podcast where we talk about the potential pitfalls. But I would say the shred of hope is that, I love our economists and keep publishing articles and we'll keep reading them, but their vision is their hindsight vision is 2020, right? Economists do a great job after the fact of telling us, here's the wrong turns that we took in order to get there. But they haven't necessarily done such an amazing job of telling us what's coming. Maybe their crystal ball is really made out of doggy do. What do you think, Sean? Is that enough shred of hope just to say, like, predictions are predictions? We don't know. It's hung up on a big what if. If that doesn't happen, then what?
I think that it's unlikely we get the most negative of scenarios playing out. I think it's the economist's job is to point out, well, this might happen or this could happen, but whether that happens or not, I think is pretty low chance, in my opinion. I think what's more likely to happen is that Trump wants to make a deal. He wants to be seen as being strong with his biggest trading partners, Canada. But I think it suits him to have a North American strong team to battle. I don't know if battle's the right word, but to put up a strong front against China, against Russia, against some of the other places that are maybe not as friendly to US. And then we can all go on together. But I think if he gets us on side early, then we'll have a stronger relationship throughout the rest. I think it's in his best interest to have everybody. So I think this is short term. I think this is
I absolutely
a lot of noise up front, and let's get down to business after that. Let's sort this out. Let's go.
It's different. You go to the gym and you just finish your arm workout and you flex. It looks huge. By the time you get home and you get showered, you got regular size arms again. So maybe that's it. Maybe, coming off of his record election, he's still got all pumped up and he's flexing his muscles. But, maybe that just dies down.
I think so. I think I think like everything passes. So there was so many things that happened in the first Trump administration. We forgot about most of them by year 2, year 3, year 4. Like things just happen. This will be one of those other things. We'll be on to some other bull in a china shop thing in 6 months from now.
Well, for sure, and the media really got a hold of the the last time that Trump was president. The non Fox media, let's call it. They were worried, oh, Trump is going to be a dictator and he's not going to leave the office, and there was a lot of chatter similar to the chatter that we're listening to now, based on stuff that he said. Like it's not like he didn't say he was going to tariff 25%. He absolutely said it and he doubled down on it. But he says a lot of stuff that a lot of it doesn't really come to fruition. So how much should we worry? I don't know. Should we be prepared? For sure. And that looks like what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I read an article this morning, and we got some numbers to share. And these are some Bank of Canada rate forecasts by the big lenders: TD, CIBC, RBC, BMO, Scotia, and National Bank of Canada. So that's the big six. And for the most part, you notice that the red one here is Scotiabank, and they're sitting at 3% Q1 all the way to Q4 2026. Did they forget to submit their prediction? What?
Yeah, just write down the same number. Just quickly, they forgot and they had to quickly write it down before the teacher saw.
And mine goes to 2%. I think that
you're with RBC.
RBC and myself are aligned, and most of them, there's a little bit up and down. But National Bank of Canada has already gone out and projected that by Q1 2026 there'll be a 50 basis point hike. And we just talked about the hindsight thing and the economist's prediction and crystal ball. What's your take on that? I mean, I think it's absolutely absurd. Just anecdotally, I used to work for a weather company, and they know that outside of 2 to 3 days, their weather forecast is absolutely inaccurate. But they publish a 2-week forecast because the consumers demand it. They want to know what it's going to be like in 2 weeks, but it's very, very inaccurate. I'm looking at this thing. I'm saying, is that similar to a weather forecast?
Well, I think on the way up, while interest rates were going up, Scotia was the one that predicted 8 interest rate hikes, which at the time seemed crazy that we would get 8. And they ended up being wrong, but they were the least wrong out of everybody. Like, I think some were predicting 1%, 1.25%, but nobody said 2% rate hikes. So Scotiabank, I give them more weight because they were a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more right than everybody else. But I also think that their hikes are more susceptible to week to week or month to month news, and they will move this prediction a lot more than what other banks do. So I think if I were to take a look back and say, like, well, RBC predicted this 6 months ago and they're sticking with their guns and they're not updating it. Scotiabank is updating their prediction a little bit more frequently. And could I see that we only have one interest rate cut this year based on what's happening right now? Absolutely. Like, we just don't know what's going to happen. Scotiabank's putting that in, and that's reflective of the news today. If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have been right there with BMO, RBC, National Bank, where we're down to 2%. We're down to 2.25%, almost guaranteed.
And I'm on the record for saying my prediction of 2% is based on historical sort of averages and historical trends. So I've decided to take a different approach. And I'm not going to look at this day to day. Trump said this. I'm going to adjust. Bond yields are up today. I'm going to adjust. It's not based on that. It's been based on looking back and saying, what is my sort of guess? And I'm not an economist either. I do have a business degree, but it's not in economics. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. That's where mine comes from. Just so everybody, our tens of viewers, I think we're up to 15 now. Our 15s of viewers understand where I'm coming from. It's a prediction based on historical trends and where I think that we'll wind up without all these this hurricane or this heavy weather pattern of
Yeah.
economic predictions are.
I think we can zoom in a little too close and get into all the noise that's happening day to day and week to week. If we zoom out a little bit, the Canadian economy has been over the longer period has been declining, and that would mean that we need to stimulate with interest rate cuts. All of everything that's happening right now with all the noise that's happening pushes things, well, maybe they won't go up. Maybe we'll get stagflation, which to me is the worst case scenario.
That is the worst case scenario, I think.
And it's very rare for that to happen, but it's still a possibility. And so I think that if we can just zoom out a little bit, the Canadian economy is going to need some help going forward with interest rate cuts. But over the short next month to 6 months, I think this is where things could certainly hit the fan. But long term, I think we get a great relationship with the US. Trump moves on to something else that fascinates him, and we'll go back to business.
Still be a new shiny toy.
New shiny toy. But over the next short term, I think we need all hands on deck to be able to respond quickly. And hopefully it's not too painful for the long-term outlook of Canadian jobs.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that is a good time, good spot to wrap things up. Next time that we meet, we will have a new sitting president in the United States, and maybe a little bit more news to go along with that. Sean, any final comments for the week?
That sounds good to me, Vaughn. We'll see you next week.
Take care.